Donald Trump is in very obvious cognitive decline, and there are two reactions to that fact that we see in MAGA world. The first is to cover it up. This is what the Fox propaganda outlet does, what Carolyn Levitt does, and what Donald Trump's other hand does when it's covering his bruises. The other reaction, though, is to capitalize on it, and that is what we are seeing from the shadow president, Stephen Miller, all of which was just exposed in a leak that is damning to Donald Trump's health. We are going to get into it all, but before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video, and if you haven't already and you enjoy our channel, to hit that subscribe button because it goes a long way in supporting our work. Now, before we can get into Donald Trump's health crisis, we first have to start with the man who is masterminding this disgusting and evil administration. Of course, that's Stephen Miller and his main policy, which Jasmine Crockett called out right here.
I can think back to a time in which there was stop and frisk.
Yes, that's correct.
And I could think back to a time in which that was found to be unconstitutional.
That's right.
And it was considered an unreasonable search,
yes,
as we know the Fourth Amendment stands for. And now it's almost like this argument that the Republicans have been making that somehow if you are not an American citizen, that you are not afforded the same rights under the Constitution. Like, I've got colleagues that debate whether or not they are entitled to due process, and it's
right.
like, actually,
That's
they are.
Yes.
Like, it's not debatable,
yes,
but they are trying to make it debatable. They are trying to make it seem like, well, if you're an American citizen, you get it, but if you're not an American citizen, you don't get it. And that's why we saw Donald Trump just randomly kicking people out of this country and not giving them their day in court. And we know that even American citizens have been rounded up in that. And so that is what's so dangerous about this opinion, is that we know that you don't have to pass an accent test to actually be a U.S. citizen, right? So this idea that you can look at somebody and say, I'm looking at you and I think that you don't belong.
Yep.
Well, who is it that does belong? That's my question, because it seems like they are all about making sure if you don't have any melanin
yep,
or very little,
yep,
then you are the ones that look like you belong, and you can't look at somebody and know whether or not they are a U.S. citizen.
Right.
So why is it okay for ICE to then go out and see somebody and look at them or hear them and say whether or not they're a U.S. citizen, to the extent that they are, in my opinion, violating their constitutional rights?
And for those people who don't fear that they'll be arrested in an immigration roundup because they look like they belong, this amendment, the idea that we've softened up around the Fourth Amendment, will one day come for you, because today it's about immigration. But if it could be about anything at this point.
No, and again, I think
you might be a subversive.
Well, and I also think that we may end up going back to stop and frisk. I think that they may end up relitigating that and then just decide that they want to go into certain communities.
Right.
And they want to start rounding up certain people, whether it's that you wear a long black trench coat or whether it's that you are black. Like, I think that they may end up relitigating that issue.
Stephen Miller has been the architect of Donald Trump's illegal mass deportation agenda. And although no one spills more fear-mongering, hate-filled bile than Donald Trump, it is Stephen Miller who continues to push him to do so, at least on the policy front. After Donald Trump got calls from his rich buddies who own farmlands or hotels telling him that he needed to stop his raids, he said he would for a moment, only for them to start back up again at the direction of who? Stephen Miller. Now, we know Donald Trump isn't that smart, but he does understand the political environment, the political climate enough to know when something's unpopular. So why did he change his mind? Well, maybe it's because it's not his mind at all. Lawrence O'Donnell suggested that here.
Well, if Donald Trump gets dementia, how will we know? Donald Trump's mental decline, which is more and more obvious, started from such a low level of mental processing power that it's hard to track his decline. It's from low to lower.
When would we really know if Donald Trump had completely lost it? He's never really had it together. This administration, more than any other time in his political career, shows how weak he is, how much he forgets, how little he understands. So, of course, we wouldn't know if there was a problem with Donald Trump, because this is how he's always been. But maybe someone very, very close to Trump would. Someone very, very close to Trump would take advantage of that and make themselves one of the most powerful figures in the world. And that is what Stephen Miller, a man who rails against the bureaucracy, hates the shadowy government that he says he's going to stop, is doing. And it's exposing Donald Trump's deteriorating health. Inside Stephen Miller's reign of terror, everything you loathe or love about Donald Trump's America, you hate or cherish about Miller's Republic of Fear. More than 7 months into Trump's second term, Stephen Miller has become America's, if not the world's, most powerful unelected bureaucrat. With Trump's blessing, Miller has allowed to run the remake of the country in a manner virtually unheard of for a U.S. government official of his rank. Think of any egregious policy from the Trump administration, chances are it was driven by Stephen Miller. All of it bears Trump's signature, but the president is not the one spending his nights writing executive orders and bending legal theory to his will. Nearly all of this bears the authorship, or at least co-authorship, of Miller. Everything you loathe or love about Donald Trump's America, you hate or cherish about Stephen Miller. Under Miller's guiding hand, the government can deport or kidnap you or your spouse without due process. He's going after habeas corpus. They're launching the DOJ into criminal investigations against their enemies. The president and his lieutenants can arrest you at routine courthouse check-ins. Stephen Miller is doing whatever he wants. Shadow Secretary of Defense, Prime Minister Miller, the real Attorney General, the DHS boss, President Miller. Trump administration officials and other Republicans close to the president and the White House are paranoid that Miller will one day hear them gossiping about him behind his back, but they still whisper the unofficial titles and nicknames that they bestow onto the White House Deputy Chief of Staff. What this article shows more than just the depravity of Stephen Miller, which I think is obvious to all who encounter him, is how much needs to be run behind the scenes, how much little Donald Trump actually knows about his own administration. Now, let's remember, this is a man who began his presidency by raging against, attacking Joe Biden's auto pen, saying that it was the greatest scandal in history, that any president who didn't know what they were signing, had legislation, an executive order, even a letter signed without their understanding, it should be null and void. Well, that's the entire Trump presidency. Donald Trump doesn't know what he's doing. He knows it's hateful. He knows it's bigoted. He knows that it is a politics of subtraction that has become the cornerstone of the right, but he couldn't articulate it. Donald Trump quite literally has to have every executive order that he signs explained to him beforehand in 6th grade vocabulary. That's what happens to our president. That is how tapped out of everything that he is, while Stephen Miller executes his reign of terror on us. And it is that politics of subtraction that I talked about. Miller and the rest of his ilk think that if they can just pry away bits and pieces of our government, of our society, of our country, eventually they'll get to some foundation that they think is right. But what they're actually searching for is a rock bottom without the rights and civil liberties that we've fought for in this country, a rock bottom where Stephen Miller and the right wing can do and impose whatever beliefs they have upon us. That's what they want. These people who talk of free speech don't care much for it when we're critical of their fascistic ideas, and don't even let them hear you calling them a fascist. Now they say that's a slur. Why? Because they want to police language, and they want to police you as much as possible. That is what Stephen Miller is doing as Donald Trump's brain is melting away. And it's a very, very scary reality, especially with what we've already seen of this administration that was further called out by Jasmine Crockett.
Well, for every immigrant that you have an example of, I'll raise you at least 2 to 5 white supremacists, if not more, right? So, like, you've got to look at who is it that is committing the crime? Who is it that is committing certain types of crime? And then you need to figure out why. And then you go in and you say, this is how you reduce it. You and I talked about poverty, right? So if you are doing things that are going to increase poverty, whether we're talking about your terrible tariffs that are illegal as well, or whether we're talking about the fact that you are defunding healthcare, you are defunding food, you are now going after education and defunding education and want to get rid of the Department of Education as a whole, or you want to take our tax dollars and make sure you send it off to the private schools that don't have to take every single child, you are definitely compounding the issue issue. You are not fixing anything. You are making things worse because you have no idea what you're doing. Yeah. You messed us up before. We ended up having the worst job numbers when you were in the last time. And guess what? We've got the worst job numbers now, especially when you start to look at the Black community. Yep. So listen, if we want to figure out how we are going to be safer, we probably need people that have actual intelligence and actually will pay attention to data and facts and go from there. But what they're doing right now, it almost feels like, you know, I've seen the memes about the purge and all these things. But as somebody who understands history, when I see ICE, I see slave patrols. Now, I never lived through the slave patrol period, but if you know the history of policing in this country, then you understand that they were born out of slave patrols. And now with the Supreme Court saying this, it's almost like you can just go grab them up. That is what they're saying. And that is a problem. We all should have a problem with that. But when you don't want to teach American history that includes Black history, then you lose out on the benefit of understanding that we have been down this road before and it was not good and we fixed it once. And it is a shame that we are relitigating this and we are going to have to fix it again.
It is quite obvious what the objectives of Donald Trump's government are. They want to make people afraid. They want to make people hide. They want to make people quiet. They want people to disengage. The Russ Vought quote of "I want federal workers to feel traumatized when they come into the office every day" doesn't just apply to those in government. It applies to all of us. Donald Trump fundamentally needs us to be disengaged for him to carry out his authoritarian project. If we don't know what's going on in the White House, it's a lot more difficult for us to oppose it, which is why they want to think, or us to think, what's happening is so complex and will soon be updated. Why do you think Donald Trump uses that 2 weeks away remark? It's not just because he needs to deflect, it's because he wants you to think that, oh, it's just down the line, it'll happen eventually, maybe soon. He doesn't want you to know when or where, what form his policies come in. Surprise, shock the system, attack quickly, go, go, go. That's what this administration is about. That's what they've always been about. Ripping our country apart as quickly as possible so no one can get in their way, so no one can think critically about what they're doing and think of ways to stop it. That is why our engagement is so important. And that is why we are going to continue to call out their lies, call out the bullshit every single day. And if you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video, and if you stuck around to the end, drop a blue heart in the comments. We're going to keep on fighting. We won't be silenced. Until next time, I'll see you soon.